DC, DCC, or even DCC with automation. What's right for you? Hi, welcome back to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie. And before I start, I have to give a plug to New Junction, who, up at the Worley Model Railway show back in November, Richard gave me a little interview, and should you choose to watch that interview, and I'll try and leave a link there to his channel, so you'll have to then find the video because you can't link a direct link to other people's individual videos. But it's an interesting interview. It tells you a little bit more about me and my background and how I got into this and my sort of thought processes, so you might find it interesting, but you might not. And there's also a tab, I think it's community, on this channel. You can hit the community tab and there's a link there, but I really don't know how that works. So there we go. Onward. I'm often asked through comments on this video channel and at model railway shows where I pitch up about should people do DCC or DC on their layouts? And of course it all comes down to a couple of things really. It's what you've got invested in the hobby up to now and how much time and money you wish to invest. If you've got a substantial DC layout with lots of locos that aren't DCC ready, then it's probably not advisable to change to DCC. I mean, if it's a home layout and of course you fancy going on the exhibition circuit, you could easily make yourself a 2 foot by 6 foot layout with DCC if you'd wish to dabble your foot into that kind of pond. Sneeze. If, however, you're just starting out, God blimey. If, however, you're just starting out in model railways, then I would always suggest you go down the DCC route. And if you're going to buy second-hand locomotives, make sure you buy either DCC ready or DCC fitted. Indeed, if you're actually staying with DC, it's also advisable to buy DCC ready locos because the market is just falling away on locos that aren't DCC ready, if that makes sense. But if you're going to stay with it forever, you could find yourself with a whole new market of used locos because the guys who are going to DCC are dumping their DC locos. This is getting out of hand, this. So my advice is if you're an established DC modeler, you might want to stay with it. To change your layout to DCC isn't that complicated. You really need to just look at wiring through your isolating switches because you don't need them, and then adding lots of droppers throughout your layout to remove all the isolated areas so that your 15 volts AC is actually a 15 volts DC on a square wave, but we're not going to go into that right now, so that you get good power right across your layout. You see, with DC layout, with DC track, it tends to work on 12 volts DC, and if your loco's 15 feet away from where the power goes in, then the power has to go up the track 15 feet through the loco and all the way back to where the track power goes back to the transformer, and you're going to get power loss on that transmission. Whereas with DCC, you tend to work on 15 volts, and with intermediate droppers going across the layout, you don't get that power loss. It's kind of a bit of physics, really. Probably enough physics by now. So that's my kind of views. Big DC layouts can be converted, but it takes some time. But it's the money that you've got to invest in rolling stock that really matters. So, okay, we'll move on from DC to DCC, and let's say you're starting up your nice new shiny layout. Well, it's either going to be a tail chaser or a small end-to-end, and DCC isn't really that complicated. every piece of track it's recommended should have a set of droppers that go back to a terminal block, and perhaps a terminal block there goes onto a bus, and the bus goes from one end to the other, and obviously in the middle of the bus there's your power feed coming out from your transformer. I use two transformers. I use my old Dynamis, which is, you know, a pretty reliable thing, and it's so easy to program locos with the Dynamis once you've got the little Pro box underneath. And I've also invested in Digitrax, which is the kind of grown-up side of my main layout. I had bought the Dynamis to dip my toe in the water of railway modelling when I came back into it a few years ago. Liked the feel of it, but I've kind of outgrown the Dynamis. It's just not that dynamic, really. But there's nothing wrong with that as a good starter, or to control a small layout. I kind of like it. It's good, it's reliable, and I think the new ones are a little more robust. I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel. I notice that actually only about 25% of my viewers do. And also, if you click the little bell icon, then you'll get a notification when the next video is released. So you go and buy yourself your nice shiny new DCC ready loco. Well, what should you do then? Well, you're obviously going to have to stick a chip in it. And if your modelling skills are such that you're even scared to take the body shell off to fit your chip, then you've got a long way to go, because these are basic steps for modellers, and these aren't the sort of things that you can avoid doing in the future. These are the things you need to improve your basic modelling skills. The best thing to do, of course, is to go and find someone who's used to doing it and say, here's my Bachmann doodah, and here's my 21-pin chip that I've bought. Can you fit it for me? Or can you show me how to do it? You know, monkey see, monkey do is the ideal kind of way. And it's exactly how I've learned to do mine. I mean, I've fitted a Bachmann chip not too long ago and managed to bend the pins. So, you know, we're not all infallible to these things. But when you put chips on and off, you need to have like sort of, you know, wooden lollipop sticks to sort of prise them on and off so you don't damage the circuit board, and all these little things. And, you know, you do it on a blanket so that when the screws fall out, they don't bounce everywhere. And I'm sure in my railway room here, there are numerous amount of screws that have gone into the old Dyson cleaner, and I've never seen them again, because that's the kind of careless modellers we are, perhaps. So, with DCC then, you go and buy your shiny loco, but what chip should you buy for it? Well, clearly, if it's a 21-pin decoder, you need a 21-pin chip. If it's an 8-pin or whatever, your N-gauge 6 pins, and all this kind of stuff, so you buy the right size decoder for your model. But there are chips and there are chips. I mean, you can buy a Bachmann 21-pin chip for 18 quid. You could buy, and it might not be made by Bachmann. I don't think Bachmann do make chips. They'll always subcontract to someone else to make them. Or you could go perhaps to the other end of the scale and buy a Lens Silver Plus chip for 30, 35 quid. But you do get what you pay for. But when you've just paid £100 for that loco, you're having to pay it another third again just to get decent performance out of it. So again, that's another DCC question. Are you prepared to buy all these chips? And if you buy the cheap ones, they don't necessarily last forever. They lose their addresses. And if you go to DCC Sound, another whole ball game, because you've got Hornby TTS at one end of the scale, and let's say Lock Sound 5 from ESU at the other end. One's 40 quid, the other's about 115, 120 quid. Is there that much saving in buying the cheap one? You know, are you going to buy cheap and then get fed up with it and buy something else? Well, from the people that I've spoken to who have bought Hornby TTS chips and installations, there's only one bad thing about it, and that's the speaker. So the first thing you do is get rid of this. That'll be the phone then. God. Sorry about that. That was my wife finishing work. Anyway, so TTS. Lots of people like TTS chips. Once they've changed the speaker, they seem to get reasonable sound out of it. Other people don't like TTS chips. They find them unreliable. They lose their addresses. Sometimes the sounds work and the loco doesn't, and vice versa. I don't have an opinion on this. I can only just, tell you what I've heard with other people in the community, and I'm sure if you mooch around on Google and YouTube, you'll find all the reviews, both for and against. But 40 quid worth versus 115, it's an interesting comparison. Of course, I did mention DCC versus DC, and of course that's the main thing for me to bring me into the hobby was sound. But when I look back towards DCC now, I never drove my engines with my transformer, because what I fundamentally did when I turned the knob is I drove the track, because all I did was raise the voltage from 0 to say 12 volts, that was flat out, and all I did was regulate the voltage on the track, and whatever was sat on it, if there's 2 locos, 3 locos or whatever, they all kind of sped off together, and I turn the power down and it stops. And you're not driving the locomotive itself. But with DCC, you really are driving the locomotive, because you can dial up the locomotive. Let's say the address is 10 or whatever. You turn the knob or turn up the power, and the locomotive starts off reasonably slowly. In fact, you can get it to run exceptionally accurately, or as some people like to say, prototypically. If it's a heavy freight train, you can program the chip to always replicate, say, I don't know, a class 37 pulling a heavy coal train, and it will always start slowly and it'll always run down slowly. And if it's got sound fitted, it'll work harder as it pulls away, and the sound will back off as you take away the power. These things are fundamental in what is to me a very exciting hobby. To take things a stage further, you then start to invest in money. Now, I believe Hornby do make a form of automation with their locomotives. I'm not an expert on it, so please don't slag me off. Why not? Lots of people do. Please don't slag me off if I get this wrong, but I believe that the Hornby system works on time, so that you run a locomotive from A to B, and you time it kind of over a few functions, and it knows that it should be there in 20 seconds. So 20 seconds later, it stops it, and hopefully it's not buried in the buffers or still on the throat of points, on the approach. But I believe that's the way it works. Away from that, you're into block detection, and that means that your layout is split up into certain blocks, and a computer knows which block your train occupies, or which series of blocks even that your train occupies. There is a link here to the very first video I made, and it was about the original Chadwick TMD, and it covers somewhat about block detection, and it shows you the changing colours as the locomotive works its way around the track. I use Digitrax, and this is not a plug for Digitrax. I get on fine with it. The handset is extremely clunky and horrible, and I wish they'd make a new one. But Digitrax do make all the other components required. But if you were to contact Justin or Jason, can't remember, because he will give you good sound advice without the bias that, a lens user or a Digitrax or a power cab user might have. But I've knelt at the altar of Digitrax because they make all the individual components. But is it expensive to get in? Do you want to do it? Well, yes, it is very expensive to get into, because all of these electronic components cost between 50 and 150 quid a go kind of thing. There's something from Digitrax called a BDL168, and you feed in 16 inputs from 16 blocks, or from 2 inputs from 8 blocks, because that's sometimes the way you need to do it, and that feeds your computer. Oh, that's another thing, you need a computer, and your computer needs a program. So if you were to buy Train Controller Silver, I think it's about 400 quid, or JMRI, which is free, but it does take a lot more work. So these are the things you need to look at before you go down the avenue of automation. In DC, of course, automation is quite simple. It's very easy to install, short shuttles where a DMU will run one end to the other and back. But in DCC, that's quite a difficult thing to do if you want it to start up you know, rev itself, put its horn, sweep along, change a couple of points up to the other end, stop for 5 minutes and then come back. That needs a decent program, and it requires block detection to find out where it goes. So that's really all I've got to say on block detection. It is a nightmare. You know, as I know, I hope you know, that I'm involved with McKinley Railway, and McKinley Railway have done a block detection video. You'll see David Townend, and again there'll be a probably link here to McKinley, but you'll have to find the block detection video, and it's around about number kind of 25, 26, I believe, something like that. And it shows you a little bit more on a basic layout how block detection works and whether it's a sort of thing for you. And of course you can go from DC to DCC, as we've mentioned, and from DCC into DCC with block detection. But please, please, please do your homework before you start out on this somewhat elaborate journey. It's extremely time consuming, and it can turn out to be very expensive. And you're not going to buy the components you need second hand on eBay. I mean, these things come up very rarely. And of course, if you buy a second-hand BDO 168 for 80 quid and it doesn't work, you know, 80 quid is a lot of money, you know, to throw away. It's a very steep and expensive journey to take, and the learning curve with train controller and block detection is very, very steep. You don't have to be an engineer. You just need to be able to take baby steps and work it through it one at a time. So I do hope that that helps and you feel somewhat better informed. Well, that just about wraps up this video, but it also wraps up the year. Hopefully you've had a good Christmas, and I do hope that 2020 brings you lots more modelling fun in what is, I believe, a fascinating hobby. Hopefully this channel, along with many others, you've found useful and most of all inspiring and entertaining, which is what we try to do. So to that end, I'd like to thank my patrons, and I do hope you've subscribed. And if you're bored, there's a video here and here. Take care. Thanks a lot. See you in 2020. Take care. Bye-bye.